It's my pleasure today to introduce the two candidates for county commissioner, Mark Ozias and Jim McEntire. Welcome to you two. As far as the arrangements, we'll start with a opening statement by each of you for 8 minutes. And this sounds very familiar because I read in the paper that it's practically the same as you did at the Chamber of Commerce on Monday. But there'll be an 8-minute presentation. We'd like you to make sure you include in your opening statement what your philosophy is on the role of the office for which you're running, and name two things you'd like to accomplish and how you would do that. So we'll start with a coin flip. Considering Mark as the visitor, since he's the challenger, and so
he's a non-Rotarian. There it is. Jim's got it. Oh, don't flip it.
You might want to do
try
that.
this again. Okay, Mark, call
Tails.
It is tails. Would you prefer to go first or second?
I'll go second.
Okay. In that case, we'll ask Jim McEntire to come up and make his opening statement.
And I believe that Patty's the one that will be giving you guys the time notification. So just look at Patty for any direction in that.
Goes right now.
Very good.
2 minutes, 2 seconds. That's totally arbitrary.
Whichever side indication to start closing up. Thank you very much. Lovely to be back with you again. I see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces, and actually some red badges. I started out in the Swim Noon Rotary Club. Rotary's a tough outfit. I couldn't make the meetings anymore because I got too busy as a board commissioner, so I had to transition over to the Crack of Dawn Club, as I call it, on Friday morning, which is really tough for a non-morning person. And I had to go through Rotary boot camp all over again. They wouldn't accept any credentials that my former club offered or anything like that. Actually, you know my biography. I won't spend a lot of time going into my professional background, except to say I've had 46 years of service to my country so far, excuse me, in various and sundry capacities. First as a military officer in the U.S. Coast Guard, second as a senior federal civilian executive in Washington, D.C. Learned an awful lot about how Congress works or doesn't, how the federal bureaucracy works or doesn't. And for the last 8 years, first as a court commissioner and now as a county commissioner, finishing up my first 4 years. And so, before I go any further, in case I forget, I want to ask you for your vote and your support. And I hope at the end of this meeting you will think it was exciting as it was billed by your president, Jessica, in the lead-in. Why am I running? Number one, I want to serve my country. I want to keep serving my country. 50 years, which would be at the end of the second term, is a nice round number. And so I think 50 years would be a great personal milestone to hit. 46 years has been nice. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I wouldn't do a thing different. My only experience working in the private sector came one hot Georgia summer when I was hired by somebody to shovel out chicken houses. That was a defining moment as to what I did not want to do for the rest of my life. So I decided to go into the military. I think I have a very good record as a county commissioner of putting people first and the economy first. And that takes leadership. Leadership involves persuading other people to your point of view and also being persuaded by other people to their point of view when they have a better idea than you. That has been the history, I think, of my tenure in elected office to this point. You got to do your homework, you got to know your subject, you've got to lay out your ideas in a clear, cogent, and persuasive way. And so I think I have been able to do that in the main so far. I'd like to keep doing that. So leadership is about knowing values, knowing principles, and laying out some results that you want to achieve. The results that I have been about so far have been, as I said, about putting people in the economy first. So the second thing I want to leave with you is a continued emphasis on economic improvement. I said 4 years ago, didn't think of it 8 years ago, but I said 4 years ago, my job, personally, that I've assigned to myself, is to find any and all ways that I can to get behind Clallam County's economy and push as hard as I can. You can do some of that in county government, but a large part of that is done in coordination and cooperation with other governments. We've just seen an example of that, excuse me, with the Composite Recycling Technology Center, which was a port project, but it also, of course, involved the city, and it involved $1 million worth of your tax money that comes to the county government as a fiduciary for what is essentially a venture capital fund. There's other previous examples when I was a port commissioner in our attempt, the port, the city, and the county to persuade NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to home port their ships here in Port Angeles. That was ultimately unsuccessful because of $20 million the Oregon State Legislature put on the table, and that was persuasive. We didn't have that. Our state constitution prohibits that. So that was our disadvantage, but that was the forerunner, I think, of the latest example of intergovernmental cooperation, and of course that ultimately would benefit the private economy, because that kind of infrastructure is what private businesses can use to build their businesses on top of, hire people, build community wealth, so forth. That's really important for our county. We're still seeing the workforce, the ones that are drawing paychecks and the ones that want to draw a paycheck, we're still seeing those numbers diminish over time. That's not a good trend. I want to see what we can do to reverse that trend, or at least arrest the trend and keep it from deepening. Some of that, of course, is demographics. Old folks like me, you know, I got my Medicare card a couple of months ago, so the federal government at least thinks I'm over the hill. Some of that is just demographics. Some of it is we just need to do a good job maintaining focus on economic activity, economic improvement, and that's a job for us all. Government can't accomplish but so much as far as removing impediments and encouraging economic growth. The last thing I want to mention, and you've seen some of it in the newspaper, is my seat on the State Board of Natural Resources. Natural resources, timber in particular, is a historic and strong segment of the economic assets that we as a community have. There's some 93,000 acres of land that was that came to the county through tax forfeitures back in the 20s. It's now in state ownership. They manage the harvest on those lands in trust for the counties, and not just for the county government, but all sorts of other taxing districts as well. If you're a taxing district with a property tax levy, you get a slice of the income that comes to the Department of Natural Resources when every tree is harvested on those lands. We need a better rate of return on that economic asset. That's a huge advantage that we have. And so my job is to garner 3 additional votes on the Board of Natural Resources to increase the amount of harvest in perpetuity and decrease the amount of lands that are set aside for various and sundry reasons that might not be necessary today. So that's the 3 points I wanted to hit. You be the judge of whether I successfully jumped through the hoop that was laid out by Ken, the moderator, and I would look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for your invitation to be here today.
I'm Mark Ozias, and thank you very much as well for myself for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate it. Many of you don't know me as well as you know Jim, so I'm just going to take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about my background. I have 2 main career arcs. One of them is in the nonprofit world, where I have about a total of 14 years worth of experience in nonprofit management, nonprofit development, and in fact that provided me with both my first experience here on the peninsula, when I used to come out and talk to people about estate planning, and also my first experience with collaborative leadership, which is a theme that I'll touch on likely several times today. I was engaged early on with a group in Seattle called Social Venture Partners, which was an attempt to take some of the tenets of venture capitalism and apply them to philanthropy. And learning about both the challenges and opportunities of trying to help people work together who don't necessarily speak the same language in order to achieve a common goal was a very powerful experience. I also have been a small business owner here on the peninsula. My wife moved to the Squim area. My wife and I moved to the Squim area about early in 2004, and we moved here to open a business. We've owned 2 independent businesses in our time here. The first was a wholesale and retail plant nursery, which evolved into a plant and produce business, which eventually evolved into the business that we're most well known for, which is the Red Rooster Grocery. It was a retail store in downtown Squim. Our emphasis was on promoting local food producers, and in the almost 5 years we were open, we successfully circulated hundreds of thousands of dollars through our local economy and through our local food economy. And that experience certainly helped me to understand both the challenges, the opportunities, but particularly the power of harnessing small business owners here on the peninsula. You asked us to address our philosophy of the position, and when I think about county commissioner and what the job of county commissioner is, I think of it in several different ways, but I think the most meaningful way to think about the job of county commissioner is our job is to live and execute and elevate the values that Clallam County citizens have asked us to uphold. These values can be found in our charter. Clallam County has a mission statement too. The values that are highlighted are things like collaboration, accountability, cooperation, partnership, and customer service. And I believe that the job of a leader and the job of a county commissioner is to find ways to take those values that we have been asked to live and turn them into action. And that's not always an easy thing to do. That's a difficult thing to do. But I think that's the job of commissioner. And oftentimes, the job requires leadership. There are certain elements of the county commissioner position which are, it's very clearly your job. The county commissioners are in charge of the budget and ensuring sufficient revenue comes in to meet obligations, prioritizing among expenditures. But there are so many more opportunities where the county is able to or has the opportunity to provide leadership. A couple of examples. One that's been in the news lately is the Squim School District bond measure. Well, the county obviously doesn't have a specific role in supporting individual school districts, but it's very much in the county's interest for our economy, for the welfare of our children, to be engaged in the conversation. And I believe that as commissioner, you have a bully pulpit, and there's no reason not to use it when supporting efforts that are crucial to the entire community. So not just waiting for things that come across the desk, but actually actively reaching out and engaging in community-wide issues where the county has the ability to perhaps make a difference. My priorities as county commissioner, I really have two. And the first is promoting, supporting, maintaining, developing a more diverse and vibrant local economy. And there are a lot of different aspects to that. The groundbreaking for the Composites Recycling Technology Center is really exciting for Port Angeles. That's a project that I believe in, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a great example of reaching out and trying to find what might be the next big thing. And not just any next big thing, but something that's actually appropriate for our area, that takes advantage of resources and ideas that are special to us here in the peninsula. But we need to do much, much more than that. We need to think about what we can be doing to address the needs of the hundreds of small entrepreneurial business owners who are the backbone of our economy and who are the true job-creating engines of the future. So what do I mean by that? Well, we might take a look at the subject of community health. How does that relate to economic development and building a vibrant economy? Well, many of you in your own businesses may be struggling with issues related to homelessness, related to hunger, related to drug use. Maybe that keeps you from employing as many folks as you'd like. Maybe that, maybe your business environment isn't as positive as it ought to be. Well, we need to look at how community health impacts the economy. We need to look at how we can work with and coordinate the multiple economic development organizations that exist across the county, from the tribes to the WSU extension, to the EDC, to the port. The county's role isn't to coordinate the economy, but we definitely have a role to play in making sure that all of our economic development engines are moving in the same direction. My other priority as commissioner is to find new and creative ways to engage the public. We are all separated from our government when we're discouraged to participate. The best ideas don't come forward when we are discouraged from participation. So I'm committed to using technology, thank you, and other creative ways, and making a commitment to engaging citizens and engaging stakeholders in decisions at which they ought to have a seat around the table. And the reason why that's important is because we actually want to see things get accomplished. And in order to do that successfully, leaders need to ensure that everyone who ought to have a stake in the outcome is sitting around the table and actually has accountability for making the outcome happen. So I thank you very much for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to earn your vote.
Preparing for the presentation by the panelists today, the board of directors met last week and developed some questions that I think would be of interest to the entire membership. We'll ask you to spend maybe 4 minutes at the most answering these questions. And then after these questions are asked, if there's additional time, we'll take questions from the floor. But these were designed to be fair to both of you. We'll ask, first of all, what actions can the county and you as commissioner take to help address climate change and warming trends? And we'll ask Mark to come back up and address that question. And then Jim.
Thank you for the question. There are a number of things that the county can do to address global climate change. And the first is to acknowledge that global climate change is reality. And so I think that's an important starting point. We don't know exactly what our future holds, but it's more likely than not that here on the peninsula, global climate change means a couple of specific things. One is warmer winters, less snowpack, therefore less availability of water. Another, rising sea levels. That's already becoming an issue in certain parts of the county, and we expect it to continue to be an issue. And there are others. So acknowledging the reality is the first step. Then finding ways to try and plan for that is the next step. We'll spend a little bit more time in the next question, I believe, talking about water. But with regard to global climate change, if we are expecting that the most likely future is one of less access to water and more people moving to the peninsula, then we need to ensure that we're planning for that reality. If we do nothing, then we're going to end up in a position where we're not able to attract people to move here, and our economy doesn't continue to move forward, and we're all worse off. So I don't think that's not the right way to look at the future. With regard to what the county can do specifically to address global climate change, well, one place to start would be finishing the county's climate action plan. That's been on the table for a couple of years. It's not a huge deal, but it's a symbolic gesture at the very least, if not a real gesture, to put some changes in practice into motion and to show the county as a leader in thinking about what sorts of technologies we ought to be promoting for tomorrow. We can also take a look at it from other perspectives. For example, we want to promote tourism, right? Well, what if we looked at doing something like setting up a series of electric car charging stations around the loop of the peninsula and doing things that help to promote green tourism. So I think there are a number of ways we can look at it, but the important points are the county commissioners need to acknowledge the reality, need to plan for the anticipated impacts, and wouldn't it be great if we could actually be leaders in such a way that our economy is being driven forward.
It's fun to watch, though.
Climate change is, of course, read the article in today's paper of our conversation on this topic at the Port Angeles Chamber, and you'll get a good sense of where I come out on this issue. And I come out on this issue informed by some earlier academic work. 40 years ago, or thereabouts, maybe even longer than that, my undergraduate work at the Coast Guard Academy was in the area of oceanography. So I have an extensive but distant familiarity with the scientific method and the thought process and the rigor that goes with that scientific method. If you read a lot of the literature these days about climate change, and there is a climate, and of course it does change, but that's a long-term process. It's not sudden, it's not overnight. If you read a lot of the literature that is associated with the region here that we live in, you see a lot of words like it could do this or it might do that. It is very difficult to take a global model, a numerical model, and reduce that down or scale it down to a small place like Clallam County, or even a small place like the northern hemisphere, the northwestern hemisphere, the continent of the U.S. Because the climate is global, it has many variables, there are many, many interrelations between those variables that we don't yet fully understand and that the models can't account for. So whatever planning you do needs to be predicated on some set of facts. And so the literature that I read is conjectural in its nature. I've seen things that range from it's going to get more rainy here in this particular part of the northern Olympic Peninsula. If you look at the temperature records as I've done, I didn't bring this chart with me today, but the last 30 years of temperature data here in Port Angeles, the temperature has actually cooled over that time. Fluctuates, of course. We've got warm years, we've got cooler years. So what is it going to do? Who knows? How can you predicate a plan on such a long-term uncertainty as to what you're going to do about it if it happens, when it happens? So that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in. And so adaptation, I think, is the best strategy. You adapt as circumstances change. And so that's, I think, the best way to attack the problem, because there may not be a problem here. We just don't know. A couple of years ago, there was a larger than normal amount of snowpack. This year, of course, we all know there was a much smaller amount of snowpack. Which one is going to define the trend for the future? Who knows? Adaptation as circumstances change is the way to do this.
Jim, I'll ask you to stay there and be the first to answer
Okay.
the second question. That is, what action should the county take to address future drought and possible water shortages?
Right. The fact this year is that precipitation levels have been pretty much normal over the county. Sequim, of course, as you all know, is the driest part of the county. Precip levels in Sequim have been pretty much usual. It came this year in the form of rain instead of snow during the wintertime. That may recur. We've got wet years in Sequim, we've got dry years in Sequim. That's true all over the county. So if that remains a trend, and who knows whether it will, we'll have to look at things like water impoundments. We don't have that money in our budget today. We'll have to look at how we might take advantage of high runoff levels, stormwater runoff levels in the wintertime if the precip form remains as it was this year, so that we can make sure that there's enough water in the river and water impounded for agricultural purposes, irrigation, that kind of thing. You know, that's a necessity in Sequim, as you all know. So who knows how that's going to take place, but you know, we can take a look at those kinds of things. I note that we took down a couple of dams that were functional still. That, you know, the lake bed had silted up quite a bit, so the water storage capacity of those lakes over the last century or less that they were in being was diminished a lot. But those kinds of things is what we're going to have to think about if Mother Nature doesn't take care of the water storage issue for us in the form of snowpack. But that's a big if. We'll see what the future holds.
This subject brings me back to the concept of leadership. And it's true that we don't know all the facts. You know, we can't say with certainty what's going to happen. But if we had to wait for all the facts to come in and be certain about how things were going to work out, then we would really never get anything done. And I again don't think that it's appropriate for leaders of any kind to simply sit back and wait until we know everything, because it will be too late. So what do I think we have to be doing to plan proactively for a future where it's more likely than not that we're going to have less water? And by the way, even if the snowpack remains normal and we have just as much water as we typically do, we're still expecting people to move here. We're still expecting there to be more demand on the limited resource. So however you slice it, it's something that we have to be planning for. If we believe that the future is one of less water and more people then I think we need to be looking at a variety of plans. The first thing that I would like to promote is the concept of conservation, because you know what? It's free and it's easy. And when people are properly motivated, they actually enjoy doing it. So I think that we rarely hear anyone talk about the topic of conservation, but I think that that's the place to start. Then we need to be looking at longer term solutions. For example, there are several different aquifer recharge operations that are being tried in the Dungeness Basin. The city of Sequim is doing one on a small scale. The Clallam County Conservation District is looking at doing that on a slightly larger scale. If we can show that aquifer recharge is effective, then that's something that will help maintain river flows throughout the year. Looking at water storage is another important long-term option and something that we have to consider. Right now, as far as I know, there's really only one option out on the table that anyone's been talking about. It's a large reservoir, a 70-acre reservoir off-river and off the Dungeness River. It's the cost of a project like this is estimated to be $30 million. You know, it's something like that would be a significant project. I don't know whether that's the right investment for our future or not. It's too early to say. But if it is, then we better have a leader who's committed to achieving the solution, and a leader who has a proven history of being able to work effectively and successfully with other individuals, with other agencies, and with other groups, because it's going to take a significant effort to put something like that together.
Mark, I'll ask you to stay there and address the third, well, be the first to address the third question. That is, please explain the Opportunity Fund and your position on how the money should be used from that fund.
Sure. Well, the Opportunity Fund has a pretty specific use already, so there's not a lot that I personally would have to add to how Opportunity Fund dollars should be used. As my opponent mentioned earlier, Opportunity Fund dollars come from taxpayers around the state. They are funneled to a small number of counties that are economically depressed, and the purpose of Opportunity Fund dollars is to support infrastructure that has the opportunity of creating jobs and promoting economic development. So, as I said earlier, I think that the Composites Recycling Technology Center is a perfect example of what Opportunity Fund dollars ought to be used for. It's an infrastructure-specific project that has a really great potential to take advantage of our natural resources, Peninsula College, and ideas that were generated here in order to create jobs. You know, this is another example. Do we know for sure that that's going to happen? No, we don't. It's someone said earlier. Maybe it was you. It's a little like venture capitalism in a way. We don't know for sure, but we're making an educated guess, and that's what the Opportunity Fund is for. What the Opportunity Fund is not for is looking at projects or programs or ideas that are not infrastructure related. And earlier in the year, my opponent tried to use Opportunity Fund dollars, to direct Opportunity Fund dollars to support staff positions at the EDC. Now, we actually agree on the importance of staff, and I would have felt the same way had I been a commissioner, that if the EDC were going to be more successful, they needed some top-notch staff, and that's definitely my bias in the nonprofit world. I think nonprofit organizations like the EDC need to have a great staff, but using Opportunity Fund dollars as a way to fund those staff positions is an example of how they should not be used. So, thank you.
My opponent very correctly pointed out that the law is very specific. on what those dollars can be used for. Just to go back to the fundamentals a little bit, the Opportunity Fund is what our term of art here in this county is. Jefferson County calls it the Public Infrastructure Fund. What it is 0.09 cents of the 6.5 cents that the state gets on every dollar spent on a sales taxable event. So that money is credited back and is kept here for the specific purpose in law of infrastructure that supports either the retention of jobs or the creation of jobs. The legislature also acknowledged, and this is particularly apropos for smaller counties, that there is a chicken and egg issue here. You need a staff. There needs to be some organization, some apparatus in smaller counties that look for and push opportunities that require the use of this particular fund, or that this particular fund would be appropriate for in terms of economic improvement, economic advancement. So you can't find opportunities unless you got people hunting for them. So that was the reason earlier when we were discussing the future of the EDC, and on that subject, if we didn't have an EDC, we'd have to invent one. We have had some difficult times over the years in the public's perception of the effectiveness of the EDC. There's been a staff change, and I think the EDC is on a much better track right now, but the jury's still out. We'll see. But in any event, until we can get the EDC to a point where it can substantially be funded with private sector dollars, the EDC needs financial sustenance, and that was the idea, and it's written into legislation. Our county ordinance restricts the Opportunity Fund to just simply infrastructure. So what I was trying to do is to get the full authority that state law gives us to use EDC fund not only for infrastructure, and that's the highest and best use of those dollars for sure, because it creates assets, but you need a staff, you need an organization, you need an apparatus to hunt out the best opportunities so that you can make wise decisions about how that money is going to be spent. Frivolous spending in that fund is really not what you want. You want a well-vetted set of projects, a well thought out set of projects, a plan to use that money that then can be leveraged by other governments and so forth. That cannot be provided to anybody except another government. It's publicly owned infrastructure that money is used for. And that's good and that's appropriate. So we need to be as smart and as wise as we can be in the use of those dollars, and I have no apology to make for what I tried to do with that. We found another way, and that's good, but I think we need the full flexibility that the law affords to us so that we can make best use of the general fund as well as these special funds like the Opportunity Fund. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm afraid time has run out on us, so we'll not have the opportunity to ask questions from the floor, but I want to thank you gentlemen for coming and talking to us today, giving us an opportunity to know you, and we'll learn more about county government. So thank you very much.
Behind Clallam County's economy and push as hard as I can. You can do some of that in county government, but a large part of that is done in coordination and cooperation with other governments. We've just seen an example of that, excuse me, with the Composite Recycling Technology Center, which was a port project, but it also, of course, involved the city, and it involved $1 million worth of your tax money that comes to the county government as a fiduciary for what is essentially a venture capital fund. There's other previous examples when I was a port commissioner in our attempt, the port, the city, and the county to persuade NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to home port their ships here in Port Angeles. That was ultimately unsuccessful because of $20 million the Oregon State Legislature put on the table, and that was persuasive. We didn't have that. Our state constitution prohibits that. So that was our disadvantage, but that was the forerunner, I think, of the latest example of intergovernmental cooperation, and of course that ultimately will benefit the private economy. Federal civilian executive in Washington, D.C. learned an awful lot about how Congress works or doesn't, how the federal bureaucracy works or doesn't. And for the last 8 years, first as a court commissioner and now as a county commissioner, finishing up my first 4 years. And so, before I go any further, in case I forget, I want to ask you for your vote and your support. And I hope at the end of this meeting you will think it was exciting as it was billed by your president, Jessica, in the lead-in. Why am I running? Number one, I want to serve my country. I want to keep serving my country. 50 years, which would be at the end of the second term, is a nice round number. And so I think 50 years would be a great personal milestone to hit. 46 years has been nice. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I wouldn't do a thing different. My only experience working in the private sector came one hot Georgia summer when I was hired by somebody to shovel out chicken houses. That was a defining moment as to what I did not want to do for the rest of my life. So I decided to go into the military.
We'll ask Jim McEntire to come up and make his opening statement.
And I believe that Patty's the one that will be giving you guys the time notification. So just look at Patty for any direction in that.
Goes right out.
Very good.
2 minutes, 3 seconds. That's totally arbitrary.
Whichever side indication to start closing up. Thank you very much. Lovely to be back with you again. I see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces, and actually some red badges. I started out in the Squim Noon Rotary Club. Rotary's a tough outfit. I couldn't make the meetings anymore because I got too busy as a court commissioner, so I had to transition over to the Crack of Dawn Club, as I call it, on Friday morning, which is really tough for a non-morning person. And I had to go through Rotary boot camp all over again. They wouldn't accept any credentials that my former club offered or anything like that. Actually, you know my biography. I won't spend a lot of time going into my professional background, except to say I've had 46 years of service to my country so far, excuse me, in various and sundry capacities. First as a military officer in the U.S. Coast Guard, second as a senior.
It's my pleasure today to introduce the two candidates for county commissioner, Mark Ozias and Jim McEntire. Welcome to you two. As far as the arrangements, we'll start with a opening statement by each of you for 8 minutes. And this sounds very familiar because I read in the paper that it's practically the same as you did at the Chamber of Commerce on Monday. But there'll be an 8-minute presentation. We'd like you to make sure you include in your opening statement what your philosophy is on the role of the office for which you're running, and name 2 things you'd like to accomplish and how you would do that. So we'll start with a coin flip. Considering Mark as the visitor, since he's the challenger, and so
The non-Rotarian. There it is, Jim's got it. Oh, don't flip it.
You might want to do
try
that.
this again. Okay, Mark, call.
Tails.
It is tails. Would you prefer to go first or second?
I'll go second.
In that case,
I think I have a very good record as a county commissioner. of putting people first and the economy first. And that takes leadership. Leadership involves persuading other people to your point of view, and also being persuaded by other people to their point of view when they have a better idea than you. That has been the history, I think, of my tenure in elected office to this point. You got to do your homework, you got to know your subject, you've got to lay out your ideas in a clear, cogent, and persuasive way. And so I think I have been able to do that in the main so far. I'd like to keep doing that. So leadership is about knowing values, knowing principles, and laying out some results that you want to achieve. The results that I have been about so far have been, as I said, about putting people and the economy first. So the second thing I want to leave with you is a continued emphasis on economic improvement. I said 4 years ago, didn't think of it 8 years ago, but I said 4 years ago, my job, personally, that I've assigned to myself, is to find any and all ways that I can to get